We've been told that history is a straight line of progress, that we're the most advanced, most connected, and most free generation to ever walk the earth. We look at our global networks and our synchronized systems as the pinnacle of human achievement. But what if the connected world we're so proud of isn't progress at all? What if it's not even new? What if we aren't moving forward into a high tech future, but we're actually circling back to a very old and very dangerous past? The truth is, the blueprint for every system of total control was drafted 4,000 years ago. It wasn't designed by a committee, it was built by a man the Bible calls a mighty one on the earth. But we've been conditioned to see this man's legacy through a lens of a harmless legend. The story of the Tower of Babel is often treated like an ancient fable, a group of primitive people stacking mud bricks in a native attempt to reach the clouds. We've been told it was a construction project gone wrong. But that's a sanitized version of a much darker reality. Babel wasn't a building project, it was a coup. It was the birth of the world's first open air prison, a deliberate attempt to synchronize human labor and language and worship into the singular machine for human ascent. It was the moment humanity tried to code its own reality independent of its creator. And at the center of this revolution stood a figure who's been scrubbed from the history books, but whose spirit remains the architect of every system of control we find ourselves wrestling with today. To the biblical writers, his name was Nimrod, but to the ancients who lived in the shadow of his walls, he was known by a different title, Enmerkar, the builder of Uruk. If you want to understand the nature of power, how tyranny actually functions at its foundation, you have to understand the genesis of control. You have to see the bricks being laid in the desert 4,000 years ago for what they really are. They weren't just masonry, they weren't just brickwork. They were the tools of a spiritual and political revolution. To get to the bottom of this, we have to look at the evidence found in the oldest records that we have. In the biblical text, Nimrod is introduced with a very specific, almost cryptic description in Genesis chapter 10. It says this: "And Cush begat Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one in the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel and Erech and Akkad and Calneh in the land of Shinar." For centuries, we've interpreted that phrase, mighty hunter before the Lord, to mean he was a guy who was really good with a bow and arrow. I've even seen pictures drawn in this way. A legendary frontiersman like Davy Crockett, who kept the lions away from the village. But when the Bible says he was a hunter before the Lord, it isn't a compliment. In the Bible, before the Lord carries a connotation of in the face of or against. In the ancient context, Nimrod wasn't hunting animals for survival. He was hunting the imago Dei. He was hunting the image of God in man. Before Nimrod, humanity lived in what we might call a decentralized world. Families and tribes and kinships, they moved across the earth with their own customs and their own autonomy. But Nimrod had a different vision. He wanted a city. We need to grasp that in the biblical narrative, the city is almost never a neutral location. From the very beginning, the city represents a human attempt to find security outside of God. The first city in the Bible wasn't built by a saint, it was built by Cain. After he killed his brother and was sent into exile, the text says that Cain built a city. It was an act of defiance, a way to build a wall between himself and the judgment of God. But by the time we get to Nimrod, that impulse has evolved into a global strategy. To the ancients, a city wasn't just a place where people lived together, it was a machine. It was a technology of gathering. Nimrod wasn't just building houses, he was designing an ecosystem to pool human resources and create a self-contained world where God was no longer necessary. This brings us to our first piece of linguistic evidence. Scholars have long noted the eerie similarities between the biblical Nimrod and the Sumerian king Enmerkar. The name Enmerkar literally breaks down into En, meaning Lord, which shared with Enlil and Enki, and Mecca, which is a phonetic match for the root of Nimrod. But the most stunning proof doesn't come from a Bible dictionary. It comes from the epic of Enmerkar and the Lord of Arata, a Sumerian clay tablet that predates the Greek historians by millennia. In this text, we find something called the incantation of Nudimud. Listen to how the ancients described the world before Nimrod's system was installed. It says this: "Once upon a time, there was no snake, there was no scorpion, there was no hyena, there was no lion, there was no wild dog, no wolf, there was no fear, no terror. Man had no rival." In those days, the whole universe, the people in unison, to Enlil in one tongue gave praise. It describes a world of linguistic unity and peace, a brief window in time just after the earth began to reset. There's a subtle hint in these ancient records of a world where the great predators hadn't yet repopulated and reclaimed the wild. In this vacuum, Enmerkar stood alone as the sole hunter on the earth. He utilized this unique window of time to oversee the transition from the organic world into what he was building as the systematized world. He understood that if you wanted to control the population, you have to standardize them. You have to take the living stones of humanity, each unique, each created with individual purpose, and you have to bake them into bricks. Think about the difference between a stone and a brick. A stone is formed by God. It's irregular and unique. It requires hard work and patience and the skilled hand of a master mason to be shaped into something useful while still maintaining its individual character. But a brick is man-made. It's standardized. Every brick is identical to the one next to it. Bricks don't need to be understood or carefully fitted. They just need to be stacked. When Genesis 11 says, they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly," they weren't just talking about masonry. They were establishing a world where the individual is sacrificed for the sake of the collective. They were building a name for themselves, a new authority that superseded the name of God. In the ancient East, your name was your authority. It was your access, like an ID. By building the tower, Nimrod was creating the first centralized identity system. If you wanted to be part of the city, if you wanted the protection of the walls of Uruk or access to the centralized granaries, you had to access the name of the system. You had to trade your autonomous identity for a standardized role in Nimrod's machine. Nimrod's genius was in the bitumen. The Bible says they used bitumen for mortar. In the ancient world, bitumen was a high-tech waterproofing agent. It was the industrial-grade glue of that age that allowed them to build structures that could reach heights never before seen. It was the connective tissue of this new artificial world. Nimrod wasn't just a king, he was a technocrat. He led and ruled by technical skill. He didn't just want to rule over people's bodies either. He wanted to rule over the gate of God, which is exactly the name of Babilu. That's what it means. He wanted to create a centralized hub where human consciousness and labor could be fused into a single, unified hive mind. And this is where the high stakes reality sets in. When God came down to see the city and the tower, his response wasn't born out of petty jealousy. It was an act of extreme mercy. He looked at the Babel system and thought, if they are one people and have one language, nothing they plan to do will be impossible to them. God knew that a unified humanity under the leadership of a mighty hunter like Nimrod would eventually hunt itself into extinction. He knew that the effort to wrestle control away from the Creator always ends in a nightmare. So he shattered the system. He introduced diversity as a defense mechanism against tyranny. But while the tower was stopped, the ambition was only delayed. In this story, we're going to look at the historical receipts that prove Nimrod and Enmerkar are the same man, and how this effort to centralize humanity has been the secret engine of every empire that followed. We're going to see how the hunter has never stopped hunting, and why this ancient system is the only way to explain what's happening in our world today. Before I go on with this story, I just wanted to tell you about my book that I'm writing, that I've actually finished the first draft of. The first draft is finished. We are in the editing process now. It's got 10 chapters and about 40,000 words and a really robust appendix. So for you folks who like to do the research on your own, I'll give you a bunch of research you can follow at the end of the book. Right now, it's just in draft format. It's a first draft. I'm editing it, or I'm having some friends also help me edit it. And it should be ready to be published in the next month or maybe month and a half. In the meantime, if you'd like a preview of the book, you can get that for free at the link in the description under this video. Or if you're listening to this on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, it's in the description under the podcast. It's in the show notes. I hope that you find it interesting. You get the table of contents and the first introductory chapter, which essentially gives you an overview of the whole book. The rest of the book is essentially going into detail on what you learn in the introduction chapter. So it'll give you an idea if it's even worth your time to purchase and read later on. Get that for free in the description under the video or in your show notes if you're listening to the podcast. So let's get back to this story of Nimrod and the system of control he built. Unmasking the figure known to the biblical writers as Nimrod requires us to look past the traditional legends and into the actual archaeology of southern Iraq, the land of Shinar. For years, the academic consensus viewed Nimrod as little more than a literary metaphor, a symbolic representation of the essence of empire. Yet the physical evidence buried in the earth has a way of turning myth into history. I'm going to take some time here to show you the parallel lines between Enmerkar and Nimrod. I want you to see the biblical truth in the historical record as clearly as possible, so I'm going to take my time with this part. If we look at the earliest layers of Sumerian history, we find a king who matches the biblical profile with surgical precision. His name was Enmerkar. As we established in the last part, the name Enmerkar isn't just a random set of syllables. In Sumerian, En means Lord or priest. Mer is the phonetic root that's likely connected to the name Nimrod, which is really more like Nimrada. And Kar is the Sumerian word for hunter. So he was, according to his name, the Lord Hunter. And where did he rule? Well, the Sumerian king list tells us that Enmerkar was the man who built Uruk. That's the very city that the Bible calls Uruk, listed in Genesis 10 as the beginning of Nimrod's kingdom. The striking alignment of these names is reinforced by the shared scope of their ambition, and this is where it gets pretty remarkable. The Bible says Nimrod began his kingdom in Babel and Uruk. In the archaeological record, the Uruk period marks the first time in human history that we see mass mobilization. We see the transition from small autonomous villages to a massive centralized urban machine. And at the heart of Uruk was a structure called Iyana. It was a temple dedicated to Inanna, the queen of heaven. But it wasn't just a place of worship. It was a centralized administration hub. It was the mainframe of the city. This is where the historical evidence gets uncomfortable for some secular scholars. There's an ancient Sumerian epic titled Enmerkar and the Lord of Arata. In this text, Enmerkar is trying to consolidate power and resources from a rival city to build a great temple, a tower that would reach to the heavens. He wanted to unify the world under his administration. The epic contains the incantation of Nudimud, which provides a direct, extra-biblical parallel to the events of Babel. The text describes a time when there were no dangerous beasts, no fear, and most crucially, when all the people of the universe addressed the god Enlil in one tongue. It then explicitly records the intervention of the god Enki, who confused the tongues that had been one. This Sumerian account mirrors Genesis 11 with haunting accuracy, describing the sudden shattering of a unified human language into a contention of many. To the historian, this is merely an interesting poem, but to us, it's a corroborating witness that the confusion of the languages was not a localized myth, but a catastrophic historical event centered on the very king who was building the first global empire. But why was he called a hunter? Why does the Bible emphasize this title twice in one verse? To understand the hunter aspect of Enmerkar, we have to look at how he treated his people. In the ancient world, kings were usually called shepherds. A shepherd protects the flock, he guides them. But Nimrod wasn't a shepherd, he was a hunter. A hunter is very different from a shepherd. A hunter stalks and traps, it consumes. Nimrod was the first man to realize that you don't have to kill people to hunt them, you just have to capture them. In Sumerian culture, the Mi, or Parsu in Akkadian, were the divine decrees, the source code of civilization. They were the rules of everything. Law, art, technology, and even religion were wrapped up in the Parsu. Legend says that the gods gave the Parsu to humanity, but Enmerkar was the one who centralized them. He took the decentralized wisdom of the tribes and locked it behind the walls of Uruk. He created a system where you couldn't participate in civilization unless you followed his code. He was hunting the autonomy of man. He was hunting the individual's direct connection to God and replacing it with a connection to the state. And take another look at the bitumen again. We know from the ruins of Uruk and the neighboring ziggurats that these builders were obsessed with waterproofing. Why? Well, because they were building in the shadow of a global catastrophe. They remembered the flood. They knew that God had judged the earth with water before. The use of bitumen wasn't just for structural integrity, it was for judgment proofing in a way. They were building a world that could survive another act of God. It was a literal wall of protection against the Creator. By using bitumen to seal their bricks, they were saying, we don't need your rainbow, we have our own seal. We have our own security. This is the essence of the name they were building for themselves. In the ancient East, to have a name was to have a legal standing. If you didn't have a name in the system, you didn't exist. Nimrod's tower wasn't just a physical ladder to the stars, it was a centralized database. It was the first registry of souls, if you will. By gathering everyone into one place and giving them one language and one name, Nimrod was ensuring that no one could escape his vision. He was the first man to attempt what we would consider globalism. He understood that as long as people were scattered and diverse, they're difficult to manage. But if you standardize them, if you turn the stones into bricks, you can build just about anything. But there's a final piece of evidence we have to address. The Bible says Nimrod was a mighty one in the earth. The Hebrew word for this is Gibor. In other parts of the Bible, this word is used to describe giants, the Nephilim. There's a dark thread in ancient history that suggests that Nimrod wasn't just a normal man who got lucky. There are hints that he was attempting to re-engineer himself to become something more than just human. In the Sumerian text, Enmerkar is often associated with the seven sages, the Apkallu of the legends, beings who were said to have brought forbidden knowledge from before the flood. Nimrod was trying to bridge the gap between the fallen world and the forbidden world. He wanted to open the gate of the god, that's literally the meaning of Babilu, to bring back the power that God had previously judged. When we look at the ruins of Uruk today, we see the bones of this ambition. We see the remains of the walls that once held the world captive. But more importantly, we see the warning. Nimrod's system failed not because of a lack of technology, but because of a divine intervention of mercy. God saw that the machine would eventually crush the humanity it was supposed to serve. Next, we're going to look at the legacy of the hunter. We're going to trace this system of control through the empires of history, from Babylon to Rome to New York, and see how the spirit of Nimrod is currently being revived for a final global attempt to make a name for humanity. The bricks are different today, but the mortar is still the same. The spirit that moved Enmerkar to build the Inanna is the same spirit preparing the world for what comes next. The Antichrist is not a new invention. In a way, he's the resurrected spirit of Nimrod. He's the final attempt to finish the work that God had interrupted in the land of Shinar. In Revelation 13, we see the emergence of a beast system that mirrors the Babel project with haunting precision. The goal of Nimrod's tower was forced unity to make a name for ourselves so that humanity would not be scattered. It was an effort to build a self-contained world where human authority was the only authority that mattered. Compare this to the system of the beast, which requires every inhabitant on the earth to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads. This isn't just about a physical mark, it's about a name. The text says that no man might buy or sell save he that had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. Just as Nimrod required everyone in the city to trade their autonomous identity for a standardized role in his machine, the final system requires a total surrender of the individual to the collective. It's the ultimate registry of souls. If you wanted to participate in the economy of Babel, you had to accept Nimrod's name. If you want to participate in the global economy of the end times, you must accept the name of the beast. The architecture is identical. But why would a world that prizes freedom and democracy ever submit to such a system? The answer lies in the technological trap, and it's being set for us right now. Both the Tower of Babel and the beast system require a total architecture. It's something that must be global, worldwide. Nimrod understood that you don't need to force people to obey if you simply control the environment in which they live. By centralizing the granary, the language, the physical walls of the city, he made survival impossible outside of his system. The convenience of the city became the chain that bound the people. That same trap is being set today. The global push for a unified digital infrastructure where your currency, your identity, and your access to society are all managed through a central, single network. It's the retrofitting of the ancient walls of Uruk. It's a system where dissent isn't punished by a sword, but by a system error. If the machine decides you no longer fit the mold, then your ability to buy or sell is simply toggled off. This is the perfection of the hunter's method, and it's being rebuilt today. The final tyrant doesn't need to chase you. He simply waits for you to realize that you can't live without the name he provides. The theology here is profound, in fact. At Babel, God intervened to protect humanity from itself. He saw that a unified, fallen humanity under a single mighty one would lead to a level of tyranny that would eventually erase the image of God altogether. By confusing the languages, God introduced a divine diversity that acted as a buffer against total control. He ensured that no one man could ever own the entire world. The architect's mission is to remove that buffer. He is coming to reverse the mercy of Babel. He's coming to bring the world back into the one tongue and one speech, not through a common language, but through a common system of control. He will be, or is, the Gibor of the end times, attempting to use the same forbidden knowledge and the same spirit of rebellion to reopen the gate of God, the Babilu, and set himself up as the architect of reality. The shadow of Nimrod is lengthening over our world. The bricks are being laid, the bitumen is being poured, and the name is being prepared. But we're not left without defense. By recognizing the pattern of the first tyrant, we gain the discernment to see the trap of the final one. We realize that the convenience of the machine is the very thing that makes us replaceable, but our identity as living stones is what makes us free. As I conclude this investigation, this story, we have to ask ourselves this question. Are we laborers on the construction site of a new Babel, or are we standing with the one whose name is above every name? We're living in a time that the ancient writers described as a season of diluting influence. It's a world where the lines between security and servitude have been intentionally blurred. As we've seen, the system of the hunter is not a modern invention. It's an ancient blueprint that has been refined across millennia. Its power doesn't lie in its complexity, but in its ability to convince us that we are building something for our own benefit. The greatest danger we face is mistaking convenience for freedom. Nimrod's city was enticing because it offered protection, a unified purpose, and access to a centralized store of provision. It connected people in a way they had never been connected before. It promised a world where man was no longer subject to the elements or to the confusion of the wild, but that security came at a price, the sacrifice of the individual. The machine of Babel required every person to stop being a unique living stone and start being a standardized brick. They became what they were building. The bricks are being laid right now, actually. Everywhere we look, the walls are going up. Not with physical mortar, no. There are too many people on earth for that anymore. But through the synchronization of our lives, our identities, and our very thoughts, the control at a subconscious level. Most people are happy to have a job on the construction site. After all, a job is a job. And they find themselves in the comfort of the rhythm of the work and the safety of the collective. But the wisdom of God calls us to a different path. Wisdom is our only defense, in fact. It's the ability to see the spirit of Nimrod beneath the modern branding. It's the discernment to realize that any system that requires you to trade your God-given autonomy for a name provided by the state is not a city of refuge at all. It's a trap. The Father is not mocked. He saw the end from the beginning, and he provided the confusion at Babel as an act of mercy to ensure that no tyrant could ever fully own the image of God in man. While the world tries to convince you to seek everything but the truth, the answer isn't found in a system or a better city. It's found in seeking Jesus and him alone. You don't have to be a brick in the wall of a falling tower. You can find your true identity in the one who actually knows your name. Turn away from the empty pursuit of the collective and seek the foundation that was laid before the world began. The days are short, the builders are busy, but the Father is waiting. As Isaiah 55 says, "Seek ye the Lord while he may be found. Call ye upon him while he is near." Thank you for joining me on this rather unique investigation into the genesis of control. We've seen the archetype of the first tyrant, and we've seen how his ancient system is being retrofitted for the world we live in today, but the pattern is only half the story. The question we have to ask now is, who's actually stepping into those shoes today? Patterns don't move themselves, they require players. So I've put together a special members-only deep dive video where I move past the archetypes and I look at the specific figures and organizations currently moving the chess pieces toward a global Babel 2.0. I covered the candidates for this emerging system and how they're utilizing the spirit of Nimrod to prepare the world for what comes next. So if you want to go deeper into the candidates for the Antichrist, join my Inner Circle, the YouTube membership, by clicking the link in the description. Your support allows me to keep digging for the evidence and bringing these historical proofs to light. It allows me the opportunity to do this. So until next time, keep your eyes open and your foundation firm. God bless.